He didn't say a word. He just walked in and started throwing her books to the floor. One by one, shelf by shelf, while her 5-year-old daughter hid behind a curtain and cried without making a sound because she had learned somehow that crying too loud made things worse. And the woman behind the counter, she never moved. She never begged. She just stood there and looked at him like she already knew something he didn't. She was right. Because that night, Reed Calloway would discover that the woman he had just tried to destroy had already saved the only person he had ever truly loved. Subscribe right now and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The first thing Reed Calloway broke was a shelf full of poetry. He didn't plan it that way. He had walked into Whitmore Books that Thursday afternoon with his 2 men, Marcus by the door and Dion just behind his left shoulder, with the full intention of being calm, measured, final. He had given this woman 3 months and 4 written offers, each one more generous than the last. He was a businessman. He would speak to her like a businessman. He would explain one final time that the block she was sitting on was going to become part of his Millhaven development, whether she participated or not, and that it was simply a question of how much she walked away with. That was the plan. Then June Whitmore looked up from her register, and she looked at him the way no one had looked at him in 15 years. Not with fear, not with calculation, not with the particular smile people put on when they needed something from him. She looked at him like he was a problem she had already solved. "Mr. Calloway," she said as if he were a regular customer who had come in on the wrong day. "We're not open for private meetings." Reed felt something he had forgotten the name of move through him. It settled somewhere between his ribs and his jaw, and it pulled tight. He walked toward her, slowly letting his eyes move across the shop, the old wooden shelves, the framed photographs on the walls, the hand-lettered signs above each section. A child's drawing stick figures and lopsided hearts pinned to the wall beside the register with a piece of red tape. He saw all of it. He noted it the way he noted everything, a habit of seeing that had made him very rich and very feared. "You had 3 months," he said. His voice was level. It was always level. He'd practiced that levelness for decades until it became a weapon of its own. "The offer on the table is $400,000, Mrs. Whitmore. Cash. That is not a number I give people twice." "You've already given it to me 4 times, June said. "My answer has been the same 4 times. "Your answer," Reed said quietly, "is costing you a great deal." "My answer," June replied, "is no." The silence that landed between them was the kind that has weight. Reed had been in rooms with judges, senators, and men who ran organizations far more dangerous than his own. He had sat in that particular silence before. He had never been the one who blinked. He was not going to blink now. He turned to the nearest shelf. Poetry section. Hard covers, most of them old spines worn in a way that meant they had been opened and opened and opened again. He reached out and ran his hand along the edge of a row, slowly, deliberately, and then he swept the entire shelf clean with one motion of his arm. The sound was enormous in the small space. Books hitting the old oak floor pages, splaying open a sound that was almost like something living being hurt. Reed turned back to June. She had not moved. Her hands were flat on the counter. Her eyes were on him. Her face was, and this was the thing he could not understand, the thing that pulled that tightness in his chest a half-inch tighter, completely still. "Does that help?" she asked. Quiet, not sarcastic, genuinely asking. Reed stared at her. "I beg your pardon." "Does it help?" she said again. "Breaking things. Does it make you feel better when people won't do what you want?" She paused. "I've always wondered about that. Whether the people who do that kind of thing, whether it actually works, whether it gives them what they need, or whether they go home afterward and feel exactly the same as before, just surrounded by more damage." Nobody spoke to Reed Calloway like that. No one. In 38 years, not a single person, not his father, not his rivals, not the men who had pointed guns at him and found out what happened next, had looked him in the eye and spoken to him like that. The tightness in his chest became something sharp. He walked to the next shelf. He cleared it. Then the next. He moved through that shop like a storm that has decided finally to be honest about itself, not measured, not strategic, just destroying, because it could, because it needed to, because the alternative was standing still in front of a woman who was looking at him like she could see something inside him. He'd spent his whole life making sure no one could see. When he stopped, there were books across half the floor, and his breathing was not quite steady, and he hated himself for that too. He turned back to June. She was still there. Still. Her eyes had not left him once. And then from somewhere behind a heavy curtain at the back of the shop came a sound. It was small. It was almost nothing. A child trying very hard to swallow a sob and not quite making it, and then trying again, and the second try being a little more successful, and the silence that followed being the specific silence of a small person, pressing every part of themselves small and hoping not to be noticed. Reed went still. June's entire body changed. It was subtle. She didn't move, didn't reach for anything, but something in her went from steady to iron. The difference between a woman standing her ground and a woman standing between a predator and the only thing in the world she would die before she let be touched. My daughter, June said, is 5 years old. Each word was placed with the care of someone setting down something breakable on an unstable surface. She is sitting behind that curtain. She has been sitting there since you walked in. She heard all of it. A pause. All of it. Reed looked at the curtain for a long moment. Something moved through him that he had no name for. It wasn't guilt. He'd burned through guilt early in his career and found it impractical. It was older than guilt. It was the feeling of having done something in front of a witness you had not accounted for, and the witness being someone who cannot yet understand cruelty, who has not yet built the walls you build to keep the understanding of cruelty out, who is sitting behind a curtain with her knees pulled up and her hands over her mouth. He straightened his jacket. He nodded once to Marcus. He walked to the door, stepping over the books without looking down. He stopped with his hand on the door. He did not turn around. "I'll give you 1 week," he said. "Think carefully, Mrs. Whitmore. Think about what you're actually protecting." The bell above the door rang when he left. June stood at her counter and listened to the sound of it dying away, and when silence came back into the shop, she stood in it for exactly 15 seconds. She counted. Her mother had taught her that. When the world tilts, you count until it rights itself. At 15, she exhaled. She walked to the curtain and pulled it aside. Willa was on the floor, knees to chest, arms wrapped around her own legs, face pressed into her own knees. She had cried silently enough that her whole small body had gone rigid with the effort of it. When June pulled the curtain back, Willa looked up with eyes that were red and swollen, and so heartbreakingly careful, like she was checking first to make sure the danger was really gone, before she let herself feel how scared she'd been. June sat down on the floor beside her. Not above her, not crouching. On the floor, the way you sit when you want to say that wherever someone else is, you'll go there too. "Mama," Willa's voice was barely a whisper. "Was that man gonna hurt us?" June pulled her in close and pressed her mouth to the top of Willa's head and held it there for a moment, breathing her in that specific smell of a child, warm and clean and utterly irreplaceable. The smell that had oriented June's life for 5 years like a compass pointing north. "No baby," she said. "He wasn't. He broke your books." "He did." "Grandma's books." June closed her eyes briefly. "Some of them." Willa was quiet for a moment. "Then Grandma would be mad." June laughed. It came out cracked and bright, at the same time the way a laugh sounds when it's fighting its way through something heavier. "Yes," she said. "Grandma would be furious." "Are you going to sell the shop?" June leaned her chin on Willa's head. She looked out through the gap in the curtain at the scattered books lying on her mother's floor. 30 years of a family's breath and care and love lying in a heap because a man in a charcoal suit had decided her grief was an inconvenience. "No," she said. "We're not selling the shop." Willa thought about this with the profound seriousness that small children apply to matters that affect their dinner and their sense of the world's stability. Then she said, "Good, because my reading corner is in here and I don't have another one." June pulled her tighter and said nothing. She didn't call the police. She knew better than to call the police about Reed Calloway. She had learned that from her neighbor Patrice, who had called the police after Calloway's men pressured her husband out of his auto shop on Derrick Street, and who had spent the following 3 months watching nothing happen at all. You didn't call the police about men like Reed Calloway. You picked up your books one by one and you put them back where they belonged, and you stood in your shop the next morning and you opened your doors. That is what June did. She stayed until midnight restoring every shelf. She checked each book, spine pages, corners, her hands working by habit and memory the way her mother's hands had worked. Some of the older hardcovers had taken damage where they hit the floor, the cracked spine on the Frost collection, a bent cover on a 1962 edition of To Kill a Mockingbird that had been her grandmother's. June set those aside carefully, the way you set aside the wounded, and kept moving. At one point, she stopped in the middle of the floor with a book in each hand, and she breathed, and she did not cry because crying was for after, for later, for the dark, when Willa was asleep. She had learned that, too, from her mother. You let yourself feel everything, but you choose when. You choose the time, or the time chooses you. And if you let it choose, it always chooses the worst possible moment. She picked back up. She kept going. 22 miles across Millhaven in a glass and marble tower that Reed Calloway owned entirely and had never once slept comfortably in. His phone rang at 9:47 p.m. He looked at the screen. Dr. Harlan Voss. He answered it. I need you to come in tonight, Voss said. He was not a man who dramatized things. That quality had made him the Calloway family's physician for 22 years. It concerns your father's transplant records. I need you to see something in person. He's stable, Reed said immediately. His father had been in the hospital for observation routine, at this point twice a year, a precaution they had practiced since the transplant 8 years ago. He's fine, Voss said. This isn't about his condition. It's about a pause that Voss wouldn't have allowed himself unless he'd determined it was necessary. You'll want to know this tonight, Reed, not tomorrow. Tonight. Reed was already reaching for his jacket. The drive to Millhaven General took 18 minutes. Reed spent 17 of them in silence, which Marcus, who had driven him for 6 years, understood to mean that he should not speak. Reed stared out the window at his city, the streets he knew block by block, the buildings that bore the fingerprints of his decisions, and he felt with an uncharacteristic and unwelcome precision the weight of the evening he'd just had. The woman who wouldn't flinch, the books on the floor, the child behind the curtain. He pressed the memory down. He was good at that. He'd had decades of practice. Voss met him in a private consultation room off the east corridor, not his office, which told Reed something, and closed the door before he spoke. He set a manila folder on the table between them, but left it closed, his hands resting flat on top of it, and Reed had the sudden strange impression that the folder was something alive that Voss was holding still. When your father received his heart transplant 8 years ago, Voss began, the donor family requested complete anonymity. Your father honored that. We honored it. You were never told anything beyond what was medically necessary. I remember, Reed said. His voice was flat. He was 48 hours from death. The transplant saved his life. I remember every hour of the 14 months we waited. Last month, Voss continued, the donor family reached out, not to identify themselves. They still don't know your father's name. They simply wanted to know. He stopped. He seemed to be choosing something. They wanted to know if the person who received the organ was still alive. They wanted to know if it had meant something in. Reed said nothing. I spoke with the family liaison, Voss said, and in the course of that conversation, certain information became available that, given recent events, your father made me aware of. I felt you needed to know. He opened the folder. He turned it to face Reed. I'm sorry to do it this way. I don't have a better way. Reed looked down at the page. He read the name once. He read it again. He read it a third time slowly, the way you read something when some part of your brain is refusing to complete the transaction, when the understanding is there, but the acceptance is filing a formal objection. Margaret Ann Whitmore, age 58, cardiac arrest. Organ donation authorized by next of kin. Survived by one daughter, June, age 31. One granddaughter, Willa, age 3 months. Reed sat very still. The room was quiet. Somewhere down the corridor, someone was speaking in a low voice. A door opened and closed. A cart moved across linoleum. She was the donor, Reed said. His voice sounded like someone else's. Yes. June Whitmore's mushy. Yes. She donated her heart to my father. He said it again, not because he hadn't understood it the first time, but because saying it aloud was the only way to make the full shape of it real. And my father has been alive for 8 years because of it. Yes, Voss said. The silence that followed was the longest Reed had sat in since his mother's funeral. Reed, Voss said after a while, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me honestly. I've been your family's doctor for 22 years, and I've earned the right to ask. Ask. What happened at the bookshop today? Reed looked at his hands on the table. They were steady. They were always steady. He had trained them to be steady. I cleared some shelves, he said. Voss looked at him for a long moment. Some shelves. Some shelves. Another long moment. Reed, that woman's mother. I know. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Her mother gave your father. I know. Quieter now. Then you understand what I'm saying to you. Reed stood up from the table. He walked to the window. Millhaven was lit up below him, his city, and he looked at it without seeing it because what he was seeing was a shop with books on the floor and a woman who hadn't moved in a curtain behind which a 5-year-old girl had been pressing her whole self small and trying not to be heard. Willa Whitmore, who was 5 years old now, who had been 3 months old when her grandmother died, who had never met the woman who had given her shop her legacy, the whole quiet enormity of her mother's love, and who had never met the man whose life that woman's death had saved. Reed pressed his knuckles against the glass of the window. He was not a man who cried. He had not cried since the night his father had been placed on the transplant list, when he had driven to the waterfront alone at 2 a.m. and sat in his car in the dark and allowed himself exactly 7 minutes of something that came very close to falling apart. Then he had driven back. He had been functional and lethal and in control every day since. He was not going to run now, but his knuckles were pressed against that glass hard enough to whiten, and his jaw was locked, and the silence that came off him was not the controlled silence of a man who didn't feel things. It was the silence of a man feeling something so large that the only container for it was absolute stillness. Where is my father? He finally said. 3rd floor. He's awake. Voss hesitated. He already knows Reed. He's known for 6 weeks. He asked me not to tell you until he had decided how. Reed turned from the window. He took the stairs. Franklin Calloway was sitting up in his hospital bed when Reed walked in. 71 years old, barrel-chested, even now. A face that had been carved by hard decades into something that looked more geological than human. He had the television on but muted, and he turned it off the moment Reed came through the door. He looked at his son. His son looked at him. 6 weeks, Reed said. Sit down, Franklin said. 6 weeks it in you. Sit down, Reed, not loud. Franklin Calloway had never needed volume. What he had was weight, and he used it now, and Reed, who had not taken instructions from another human being in a very long time, sat. Franklin was quiet for a moment. His hand moved to his chest, not consciously the habitual gesture of a man who had been doing it for 8 years, pressing his palm flat over the scar, over the heart that wasn't the heart he'd been born with. I hired someone to find out who the family was, he said. 6 weeks ago. I've known for a long time that it was someone local. There were details in the medical records that Voss wasn't supposed to let slip, but did because he's a decent man, and he thought I deserved to know at least that much. But I needed the name. He paused. I needed to know who to be grateful to. And when you found out, Reed said, you didn't tell me, because you knew what I was doing. Franklin looked at his son steadily. I knew what you were doing, he confirmed. I was going to stop it. You were going to stop it. I was in here when I found out, Franklin said, a slight humorless note in his voice. I was working on the timing. I was trying to figure out how to... He stopped, looked at his hands. How bad did it get? Reed said nothing. Franklin pressed his hand harder against his chest. How bad, Reed? I cleared her shelves, Reed said. Some of them. The books are probably fine. Most of them. The silence that followed was of a specific quality that Reed recognized from childhood. The silence his father produced when he was angrier than words were adequate for when he was so disappointed that rage had bypassed language entirely and was existing instead as a kind of atmospheric pressure in the room. Her mother gave me my life, Franklin said. Each word slow, deliberate, a man nailing boards over a wound and needing each nail to hold. You understand what I'm saying to you. Not a business deal, not a transaction. A dying woman, a woman your age, Reed, 58 years old, made a choice in her last moments to give the most irreversible thing a person can give to a stranger with no name and no face and no expectation that anyone would ever even say thank you. His voice did not break, but it went rough in a way that Reed had heard only a handful of times in his life, and each time had mattered. I have been grateful for 8 years to someone whose name I did not know. 8 years every morning for pressing my hand against this chest and being grateful. And her daughter is running that bookshop. Her daughter, who is probably exactly the kind of woman her mother was. She is, Reed said quietly. Franklin looked at him. She is exactly that kind of woman, Reed said. His voice had gone flat and honest in a way that surprised him. She stood in front of me without moving, without asking me to stop. She just stood there, and she looked at me, and she said, he stopped. What did she say? Reed was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if it helped, breaking things, whether it made me feel better when people wouldn't do what I wanted. He paused. She asked whether people like me go home and feel the same as before, just surrounded by more damage. Franklin Calloway looked at his son for a long, long time. Does it? He asked. Does it help? The question sat in the room between them, small and enormous at once. Reed did not answer. He didn't need to. They both knew. Fix it, Franklin said. Whatever you have to do, whatever it costs, you fix it. She won't take money, Reed said. Then don't offer money. She won't take anything from me. She's made that clear. Then you start by giving what she didn't ask for. Franklin leaned back against his pillows, and for a moment he looked his age, truly fully looked it, the face of a man who has spent his vitality and knows it, and is at peace with the accounting. You start by pulling back. You stop the development pressure. You give her back her peace, and then he paused. And then you find a way to deserve to be let into her life, not because of what her mother did, because of who you decide to be starting now. A pause. That's all any of us ever get, son, who we decide to be, starting now. Reed drove back through Millhaven alone. He told Marcus to take a car home. He needed the drive. He went past Whitmore Books without planning to. He just found himself there, pulled by something he didn't have a name for yet. Slowing the car to a crawl in front of the dark building, with its hand-painted sign and its window display of books Willa had helped arrange. The lights were off. It was past 11. June would be home with Willa, or... He looked again. There was a thin bar of light under the door. She was still there, still in the shop. He thought about what she was doing alone in there at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night, and he knew without needing to check, she was putting the books back. Every single one by herself, checking each one, restoring each shelf. He pulled the car over and stopped across the street. He sat there for a long time, long enough for the light under the door to finally go dark. Long enough to watch June Whitmore come out of the front door, lock it behind her, and stand on the sidewalk for a moment with her hands in her coat pockets and her face turned up to the sky, the posture of someone who is not looking at anything, just breathing, just existing for a moment between one hard thing and the next. She didn't see him. He made sure of that. He watched her walk to her car. He watched her drive away. Then he picked up his phone and called Marcus. I need every file on the Millhaven block development on my desk by 6 a.m. he said. And I need you to call off anything active on that block for the next 90 days. Permits, contractors, demolition notices, all of it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. That's $70 million of timeline, Reed. I know what it is. The board is going, I know what the board is going to say, Reed said. Let me worry about the board. Another pause. Okay. Is there anything else? Reed looked at the dark front window of Whitmore Books, at the handmade sign, at the window display of paperbacks that a 5-year-old girl had helped arrange last Sunday because this was her mother's shop and her grandmother's shop, and it was the place where she had learned that the world could contain beauty worth arranging carefully and protecting fiercely. No, he said, that's everything. He hung up. He sat in the silence of the car in the dark of the street, and he pressed his hand flat against his own chest, not over a scar, not over a borrowed heart, but over his own, the one he'd been born with, the one he had spent a very long time working very hard to use as little as possible. He felt it beat. He thought about Margaret Whitmore, who had been 58 years old when she died, who had given the most irreversible gift imaginable to a stranger, who had never asked for anything back. He thought about June restoring those shelves alone at 11 o'clock at night. He thought about Willa sitting behind that curtain with her arms around her own knees, trying to make herself small enough that the storm would miss her. He said very quietly to the dark, I'm sorry. He didn't know if it was enough. He didn't know if enough was even a concept that applied to what he owed. But it was where he was starting. And starting, as his father had said, was the only option that wasn't surrender. He started the car. He drove away through his city. And for the first time in as long as he could honestly remember, Reed Calloway drove through Millhaven without looking at it like something to be taken. He looked at it like something he might someday, if he worked for it, deserve. June didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark beside Willa, listening to her daughter breathe, and she did what she always did when the fear got too large to hold. She made a list. Not on paper, in her head the way her mother had taught her. You name the things you can control and you set aside the things you cannot, and you start with the first thing on the list and you work until you're too tired to be afraid. Okay. The list was short tonight. Put the books back, done. Lock the door, done. Feed Willa, done. Hold herself together long enough to tuck her daughter in without letting her see how scared she really was, done barely by the skin of it. The things she could not control were longer and louder, and she refused to name them in the dark because that was how fear grew. You gave it a name, you gave it a room, and by morning it had moved in the furniture. She turned onto her side and pressed her hand against the pillow. Her mother had made her old cotton, faded blue, the smell of it almost gone now. Almost just fabric, and she whispered the same thing she whispered every night. She needed steadying. "Tell me what to do, Mama." The dark said nothing back. It never did. But the asking helped the way prayers help, not because they're answered, but because they remind you that you come from something larger than the moment you're standing in. She was up before 5. She was at the shop by 6. She had regulars who came before opening, Mrs. Patrice Odom, 73 years old, and a former school teacher who had known June's mother for decades and now considered it her personal mission to spend 45 minutes in the shop every morning reading the first chapter of whatever new mystery had arrived before inevitably buying it and pretending she hadn't already read as far as she had. There was Harold, who was retired and built model trains and had been slowly systematically working through June's entire history section for 3 years. There was Danny from the coffee place 2 doors down, who always brought 2 cups and pretended it was a coincidence. They came. They noticed. Patrice walked in at 7:15, took one look at June's face and said, "Sit down and tell me everything." "I'm fine," June said. "You have the face your mother used to get when she was holding something too heavy," Patrice said. "Sit down." June sat down. She didn't tell Patrice everything. She told her enough that Calloway had come in, that there had been an incident, that she was not selling, that she was fine, that Willa was fine, that she just needed a normal morning. Patrice listened to all of it with the focused stillness of a woman who has had 73 years of practice receiving terrible news gracefully. When June finished, Patrice set down her coffee cup and said, "Your mother stood in this shop the day the landlord tried to double her rent and told her to either pay or leave by the end of the month. You know what she did?" "She paid it," June said. "Wrong. She called every single customer she had and told them exactly what was happening. Within a week, she had raised enough in prepaid book orders to cover 6 months of rent, and the landlord backed down because the story got out and he didn't want the attention." Patrice folded her hands. "Your mother understood something that men like Reed Calloway never do, that a community is not a collection of individuals. It is a structure. And structures, when they hold together, are stronger than any single man with a checkbook." June looked at her for a moment. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Patrice replied, picking her mystery novel back up with the air of someone who has delivered all the wisdom that was required of them, "that you are not alone in this, and you should stop acting like you are." The morning moved. Customers came in and June worked, and the shop breathed the way it always breathed, and for a few hours the weight lifted enough to be manageable. And then at 11:43 the door opened and Reed Calloway walked in. He was alone. No Marcus. No Dion. No men by the door, just Reed in a different suit than yesterday, dark gray, no tie collar open in a way that seemed less deliberate than usual, like he had dressed for something he didn't have the full language for yet. He looked different in the daylight. Not smaller, not less dangerous, but something was different in the way he was carrying himself, like he had put something down overnight, something he had been holding for a long time, and he didn't quite know yet what to do with his hands. June was behind the register. She looked at him and said nothing. He walked toward her, stopped 5 feet away and said, "I'm not here to make an offer." "Then what are you here for?" He was quiet for a moment that lasted a beat too long, and in that pause, June understood with the particular understanding of a woman who had spent her life reading people, the way she read books, slowly and between the lines, that he had not prepared what he was going to say. He had come without a script, which meant whatever was coming was real. "I found out something last night," he said, "about my father, about something that connects your family to mine in a way I wasn't aware of." He stopped. "I don't know how to say this without it sounding like something it isn't." "Then say it simply," June said. He looked at her. "My father received a heart transplant 8 years ago. He was 2 days from dying. A donor came through and saved his life." He paused. "The donor was your mother." The shop went so quiet that June could hear the heating system working somewhere in the walls. She stared at him. "Margaret Whitmore," he said. "Her name was in the records. Voss, my father's doctor, he told me last night. The family liaison confirmed it. Your mother," he stopped again, cleared his throat, started again. "Your mother's heart has been beating in my father's chest for 8 years." June felt the counter under her hands and was grateful for it. Something to hold on to while the floor rearranged itself beneath her. Her mother had never told her. She had authorized the donation in the hospital. June had been there 23 years old, holding her mother's hand through the last hours. And when the hospital asked about organ donation, June had said yes, because her mother had told her, years before, matter-of-factly over dinner one evening, "When I go give everything that works to whoever needs it, I won't be needing it anymore." June had said yes, and there had been paperwork, and then there had been grief, and the recipient had been a stranger with a sealed file and a name she never knew. She had never known. "June." His voice was careful and low. "I need you to understand that I did not know. When I came in here, when I made those offers, He stopped. He looked at the shelves he had emptied the night before, now full again, every book back in place. He looked at them for a long moment. "I did not know." "I know you didn't," June said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "If you had known, you wouldn't have come." He looked back at her sharply as if the answer surprised him. "You wouldn't have," she said. "You're not that kind of man." She paused and something complicated moved across her face. "You're a man who does what he does because he's decided the world runs on power and transaction, and that the only difference between winning and losing is who's willing to go further. But you're not," she stopped, seemed to decide something. "You're not cruel for the sake of it. There's a difference throughout." Reed stared at her, this woman who he had tried to break, who had just offered him, without being asked, a more precise understanding of himself than anyone had given him in years. "That's a generous read," he said quietly, "of a man who swept your books off the shelf in front of your 5-year-old daughter." "I'm my mother's daughter," June said. She was generous to a fault. It made her hard to stay angry at. She looked down at the counter for a moment. "She never told me who received her organs. I didn't know she'd gone local. I didn't know." Her voice caught just slightly, just for a half second. "I didn't know any of it." "Neither did I," Reed said, "until last night." The silence between them was different now. Not the silence of adversaries. The silence of two people who have just discovered that the ground between them was never as empty as they thought. "I've pulled the development pressure," Reed said. "The block is frozen for 90 days. No permits, no contractors, no notices." He paused. "I want you to know that's not a negotiating tactic. There is no offer attached to it. I needed to stop." June looked at him for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know." And after 90 days, his jaw tightened slightly. "I don't have an answer to that yet. I'm being honest with you." "I appreciate that more than you know," June said. Another silence. Then from the back room, Willa appeared. She had been in there for the past hour, sitting in her reading corner with a picture book that she had read 40 times and continued to select with the complete confidence of a child who knows what she loves. She appeared in the doorway, saw Reed, and stopped. She looked at him with the unflinching, unmediated assessment that small children apply to strangers. No politeness, no performance, just direct and total evaluation. "You broke my mama's books," Willa said. The color that moved through Reed Calloway's face in that moment was not something June had ever expected to see on a man like him. It was not quite shame, it was older than shame, rawer, the particular color of a man being accurately named by someone too young to know they shouldn't. He crouched down to her level. He was a large man, and the motion was deliberate, and the fact that he did it at all said something about the distance he had traveled since the previous afternoon. "I did," he said. "That was wrong. I'm sorry." Willa considered this gravely. "Did you put them back?" "Your mama put them back," he said. "I should have." Willa thought about it. "Are you going to break more things?" "No," Reed said. "I'm not." Another pause. Willa's face moved through several small and precise calculations. Then she said, "Okay, honey," and went back to her reading corner. June exhaled. Reed straightened up. He looked at the doorway where Willa had disappeared, and something on his face was very close to undone. He started. "She's her grandmother's granddaughter," June said. "Straight through." He nodded. He didn't quite trust his voice, it seemed. He pressed his hand briefly against the side of the nearest shelf, steadying himself or steadying something, and then he said, "I'd like to meet my father's donor's daughter properly. Not here, not like this, if you're ever willing." He paused. "He wants to meet you, my father. He's known about your family for 6 weeks, and he stopped. He's not doing well, not in the way he was. And the one thing he wants, I'll think about it," June said. It was not a yes. It was not a no. It was the honest and considered answer of a woman who was holding something enormously complicated and was not going to drop any of it for the sake of making someone else comfortable. Reed nodded. "That's all I'm asking." He left. No swept shelves, no men by the door, just Reed Calloway walking back through a door he had stormed through the day before, and this time the bell above it rang quietly the way it was supposed to. June stood at her counter for a long moment. Then Patrice's voice came from the armchair in the corner where she had apparently been sitting and reading this entire time. "Well," Patrice said without looking up from her mystery, "that was not what I expected." "Did you hear all of that?" June said. "Every word." Patrice turned a page. "Your mother really was something else." June pressed both hands flat on the counter and stared at the wall and tried to hold the shape of what she'd just been told. Her mother's heart. Franklin Calloway's chest. 8 years. Every morning a stranger pressing his hand against the scar and being grateful to a woman whose name he didn't know. She had authorized that donation. She had signed those forms. And she had never once in 8 years thought about where it went. She had grieved and she had raised Willa, and she had run this shop, and the heart had been beating somewhere in the city this whole time. And she hadn't known, and her mother had been right there in the world, the living, moving, beating part of her, and June hadn't known to go looking. She pressed her fingers against her own eyes and breathed. "Mama," she whispered, too quiet for Patrice to hear. "You always did know how to make yourself unforgettable." That evening, June put Willa to bed early, called her best friend Dara, and sat on her kitchen floor with a glass of wine and told her everything. Dara, who worked as a paralegal and had the capacity for information processing that June had always envied, listened without interrupting until June finished, and then said, "June, your mom's heart is in the chest of the man who tried to take your shop." "I know. That is the most insane thing I have ever heard in my life." "I know. And what are you going to do, Pimay?" "I don't know yet." "Do you trust him?" June thought about that for a long moment. She thought about the way he had crouched down to Willa's level. She thought about the way his voice had gone when he said, "I'm sorry," that particular roughness of a voice that is being honest about something it isn't used to being honest about. She thought about the 90-day freeze given without conditions, without a counteroffer attached. "I don't trust him," she said finally, "but I don't think he's lying. Those are different things." "They are," Dara agreed. "My mother chose not to know," June said quietly. "She didn't want to know where the organs went. She said she told me once, years before she got sick, she said, 'If I give something, I want to give it clean. The moment you start keeping track of what you gave and who has it, it stops being a gift.'" She paused. She gave clean. She always gave clean. And now her clean gift has the most complicated strings attached to it of anything I've ever seen, June said, which is also extremely her. Dara laughed. June laughed. It was the laugh that carries grief inside it, the kind that hurts on the way up. 3 days passed. Reed did not come back to the shop. He had said he would give her space, and he gave it, which surprised her more than she expected. She had braced herself for the next move, the next approach, the next version of the pressure campaign wearing a more sympathetic face. But there was nothing. No calls, no lawyers, no development notices. On the fourth day, she received a letter. Not from Reed, from Franklin Calloway, handwritten on plain paper in the shaking but deliberate script of a man whose hands were not entirely reliable anymore, but who was not willing to let a machine speak for him on this particular matter. She read it standing at the counter, and she read it twice, and by the second time through, she was sitting on the stool she kept behind the register, the one she'd found at an estate sale, the one her mother had reupholstered in green velvet because she said standing all day was a young woman's game. The letter was not long. Franklin Calloway was not a man, it seemed, who used more words than he needed. He wrote about the morning after the transplant, when he woke up and understood that he was still alive. He wrote about what that felt like, which was not triumphant and not grateful in any clean sense, but more like standing in a room that should have been empty and finding it still furnished, still lit, still yours. He wrote that the first thing he had felt, even before joy, was a specific and terrible weight, the weight of knowing that someone else had not woken up, that his continuation had a cost, and that cost had been paid by a stranger whose name he did not know. He wrote, "I have pressed my hand against this chest every morning for 8 years, not from habit, from intention, from the need to remember every single day that I am here on borrowed terms, and that the debt I carry is not the kind that can be repaid, only honored. And honoring it, I have come to understand, means being worth the continuing. It means making sure that the days I was given are not wasted on things that are small." He wrote, "Your mother gave me the most irreversible gift a person can give another person. She gave it clean, without conditions, to a stranger. I did not know for 8 years whose family she left behind. I know now, and I am asking you not for forgiveness, which is not mine to ask for, because I did not damage you. I am asking simply whether I might have the chance to tell you in person what it has meant. Not for my peace, I have no peace to make with you, but because you are the daughter of someone who deserved to be told, and she is beyond the telling, and you are here." He signed it Franklin Calloway, and below that in smaller letters, as if he had almost not included it, and then decided he had to, "A man who woke up." June set the letter down on the counter. Patrice, in her usual chair, said nothing, but she had stopped reading. June picked up her phone. She found the number that Reed had left on a business card 2 days ago slipped through the doormail slot without a note attached, just the card, just the number. She had looked at it for 2 days without touching it. She dialed. He answered on the second ring. "June," he said, not surprised, like he had been waiting and was not going to pretend otherwise. "I read your father's letter," she said. A pause. "He didn't tell me he was writing one." "He didn't tell you?" "No." Something in his voice that was partly exasperated and partly, she thought, something close to moved. "He does that. He decides what needs to be done and does it, and considers the communication optional." "I'll come," June said, "to meet him. I'll bring Willa." She paused. "Not because of what you did to freeze the development, not because of anything you did, because of what he wrote." "Okay," Reed said. Quiet, no leverage in it, no strategy, just okay. "I need you to understand something first," June said. "Tell me." "My mother gave that gift because it was the right thing to do, not because she wanted anything back, not because she expected the world to repay her. She would not want this to be, she would not want your father to feel like he owes us something that we're now going to collect." She paused, making sure the words were right. "I'm coming because your father is an old man who has carried something heavy for 8 years, and he's asking for something real. I'm coming because my mother would come, not for any other reason." The silence on the line was the silence of a man receiving something he did not deserve and knowing it precisely. "I understand," Reed said. "I'm not sure you do yet," June said, "but I think you're trying to. And for now, that's enough." She hung up. She stood in her shop, her mother's shop, the shop that breathed because they breathed into it. Outside, Millhaven was doing what it always did, moving, running, going about the business of being a city full of people, each carrying something the others couldn't see. Somewhere in it, an old man was pressing his hand against a borrowed heart and waiting to say thank you to the daughter of the woman who gave it. And somewhere in it, Reed Calloway was sitting with the uncomfortable and expanding weight of a man who has just begun to understand the difference between power and worth, and who is not yet sure he knows how to close that gap, only that he has to try on. June looked at the shelf her mother had always called the heart shelf poetry, mostly in memoirs, and the kind of quiet novels that change something inside the reader without announcing that they're doing it. She reached out and straightened a spine that was slightly out of line. Then she turned and went to find her daughter because there were things to do and the day was still moving, and that was what you did. You kept moving, even when the ground beneath you had just become something entirely different than you thought it was. You kept moving. She told Willa they were going to visit a sick man who had known her grandmother. Willa accepted this the way she accepted most information, with a brief, serious nod and one follow-up question. Is he nice? I think he's trying to be, June said. Willa thought about that. That counts, she decided, and went to put on her good shoes without being asked. They drove to Millhaven General on a Saturday morning when the hospital was quieter, and the light through the corridor windows was softer, and the whole building felt, if not exactly welcoming, then at least less like the place where the hardest things happened. June held Willa's hand and walked past the reception desk and took the elevator to the third floor. And she kept her breathing even, and she did not let herself think too hard about what she was walking toward, because if she thought too hard about it, she would stop walking. Reed was waiting in the corridor outside his father's room. He had dressed simply, dark jacket, no tie, the same collar, open way he'd come to the shop 4 days ago, like a man who had set down the armor and hadn't yet decided what to wear instead. He looked at June when she came off the elevator, and then he looked at Willa, and something in his face did the thing it had done before, that subtle undoing that he couldn't quite control. Thank you for coming, he said. Don't thank me yet, June said, not unkindly, honestly. He nodded. He looked at Willa. Hi. Willa looked up at him with the same direct, unedited assessment she'd given him in the shop. You're taller in the hospital, she said. Reed blinked. I don't think I've gotten taller. You seem taller, Willa said with the absolute certainty of someone who has thought about it and arrived at a conclusion. Then she looked at the door to the room. Is the sick man in there? He is, Reed said. Is he going to be okay? Reed was quiet for just a half second too long. Willa caught it the way children catch the things adults try to smooth over, with the radar of someone who has not yet learned to pretend they didn't notice. He's old, Reed said finally, and he's tired. But he's very glad you're here. Willa accepted this. She looked up at June. Okay, Mama. June pushed the door open. Franklin Calloway was smaller than she expected. She didn't know why she expected someone large, perhaps because Reed was large. Perhaps because men who build empires tend to occupy more than their physical space in the mind, tend to grow in the imagination to the size of the damage they've done. But Franklin was small in that hospital bed, diminished by tubes and monitoring equipment, and the particular shrinkage of a man whose body has been through something long and costly. He had Reed's jaw and Reed's eyes, that same directness, but where Reed's directness was cold and controlled, Franklin's was warm. Tired but warm, the way a fire is warm when it's burning low. He saw June first. His hand moved immediately to his chest. That gesture, the one he'd written about, the pressing a palm against the place where the scar was, and his eyes went bright in a way that he didn't try to hide. Then he saw Willa. And Franklin Calloway, who had built the Calloway name from nothing and handed it to his son without apology, made a sound that was very small and very human and completely unguarded. Oh, he said, just that, just the one sound, like something releasing. Willa walked right up to the side of his bed, the way children walk into rooms they've decided are safe directly without ceremony. She looked at him. You knew my grandma, Franklin's voice when it came was careful and warm and slightly unsteady. I didn't know her, he said, but she saved my life, and I've been wanting to say thank you for a very long time. Willa processed this. Grandma died before I could remember her, she said, but Mama tells me about her all the time. She says Grandma was the kind of person who made everybody feel like the most important person in the room. Franklin looked at June. She sounds right, he said. She usually is, Willa agreed. June sat in the chair beside the bed. She had planned what she was going to say. A few careful sentences, gracious but boundaried, the kind of thing you prepared so that you didn't arrive at a moment this large and stand in it empty-handed. She had planned it on the drive over. She had practiced it in her head. She said none of it. What she said was, she never told me she'd gone local. I didn't know it was someone in Millhaven. Franklin nodded. I didn't know either, not for 8 years. He paused and his hand pressed against his chest again. I used to think about the donor every morning. I'd press my hand here and I'd think, whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope someone is taking care of you the way you took care of me. I hope the people you left behind are being looked after. He stopped, looked at June steadily. And then I found out that Reed was trying to take your shop and that you were her daughter. And his jaw worked. I have spent 6 weeks being unable to look at my son. Dad, Reed's voice from the doorway was quiet and rough. It's the truth, Franklin said without looking away from June. You deserve the truth. I'm not here for an accounting, June said. I'm not here to assign blame. I'm here because... She stopped, looked at her hands for a moment. My mother made a choice that she never explained to me. She just made it, and it was hers to make, and I respected that. But there's a part of me that has spent 8 years wondering whether it meant something, whether it was real, whether the piece of her that she gave away found a place worth going. She looked at Franklin. And now I know. Franklin's eyes were wet. He didn't try to do anything about that. It found a very grateful place, he said. I promise you that. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the fullest silence June had sat in since her mother's funeral. Then Willala, who had been standing beside the bed this whole time with her arms loosely at her sides and her face doing its careful calculations, said, Can I hear your heart? Franklin blinked. June started to say something, but Franklin was already nodding, already lifting the edge of his hospital gown slightly, and Willa leaned forward and pressed her small ear very carefully against his chest. She was still for a moment, just listening. Then she straightened up and her face was extraordinarily serious, and she said, It sounds like a regular heart. It is a regular heart, Franklin said. His voice was barely holding together. It's the best heart I ever had. Willa nodded once satisfied. Then she turned to June. Mama, I'm hungry. The sound that came out of June was halfway between a laugh and something that would have been crying if she had let it go further. She pressed her hand over her mouth for a second, breathed. Okay, baby, she managed. We'll find something in a minute. She looked at Franklin. He was looking at Willa with an expression that June had no precise word for. It was gratitude and grief and something like wonder mixed together in proportions she'd never seen on a face before. She's remarkable, he said. She's her grandmother's, June said. Reed had come into the room at some point during all of it and was standing near the window. He had not said much. He was doing the thing June had noticed he did when he was processing something, going very still, very contained, the stillness not of a man who felt nothing, but of a man who felt too much and had spent decades building walls that were now piece by piece coming apart. She caught his eye. He looked away first. It was the first time she had seen Reed Calloway look away first. It was small. It was enormous. They stayed for 40 minutes. When June stood to go, Franklin reached out and took her hand slowly, asking permission with the slowness, and held it for a moment. I'm not going to ask you to forgive what Reed did, he said. That's yours to do or not do in your own time. He paused. But I am going to ask you to let me do something. For the shop. Not as payment. There is no payment for what your mother gave, but as a gesture. There's a fund my wife and I set up years ago for community businesses in Millhaven. Your shop qualifies. Easily. It would be administered through the foundation, no Calloway name attached to it, no strings, no conditions. Your mother saved my life. I would like the place she left you to be able to keep standing. He held her gaze. Let me do that one thing. June looked at him for a long moment. She thought about what her mother had said, that a gift with conditions wasn't a gift. She thought about the difference between payment and grace. She thought about Willa's reading corner in the green velvet stool and the handmade sign above the poetry section that her grandmother had painted 40 years ago. I'll think about it, she said. That's honest. It's enough, Franklin said. He released her hand. She was in the corridor, Willa's hand in hers, when Reed caught up to them. He fell into step beside her in that careful, not too close way that was new on him, like he was measuring the distance he was allowed to occupy. He means it, Reed said. About the foundation. There are no strings. I believe that he means it, June said, but you don't believe it about me. She stopped walking. She turned to look at him. I don't know what I believe about you, Ed, she said. You've been a certain kind of man for a very long time, Mr. Calloway. A few days of different behavior isn't the same as being a different man. I know that, he said. Do you have... He held her gaze. I'm not asking you to trust me, he said. I'm not asking you for anything. I wanted you to know that I'm aware of the distance between where I've been and where... He stopped, started again. I'm aware that I can't close it with a gesture. No, June said, you can't, Iso. But I'd like to try to close it over time, if you're willing to let that happen at whatever pace makes sense to you. She looked at him for a moment, at the man who had stormed into her shop 3 weeks ago with destruction in his hands, and who was now standing in a hospital corridor asking her permission to try to be better. She thought about what her mother would say. She thought about what Patrice would say. She thought about what Dara would say, which would probably be colorful and extremely useful. She thought about what she herself believed. Don't freeze the development indefinitely on my account, she said. If that block needs to move forward, move it forward. Build around the shop, or don't build at all, but don't hold $70 million frozen because you feel guilty. That's not what I needed from you. He blinked. What do you need? Nothing, she said. I don't need anything from you. But if you want to do something worth doing, then do something worth doing. Not for me, not because of my mother, because it's right. She shifted Willa's hand in hers. That's what my mother understood, that you don't do good things in order to balance a ledger. You do them because the doing of them is the point. She started walking again. June, he said behind her. She paused but didn't turn. Thank you, he said, for coming, for letting Willa hear his heart. He's going to be thinking about that for a long time. Good, June said. So will she. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She kept her breathing steady all the way down to the lobby and all the way through the exit and all the way to the car. She strapped Willa into her seat and closed the door and stood beside the car for a moment alone and let herself feel the full and staggering weight of what had just happened in that room. Her mother's heart, in that old man's chest, beating for 8 years. While June had been running the shop, raising Willa, missing her mother with the low constant ache that never fully resolved, her mother had been there. In the city, alive in the most literal way that mattered. She pressed her hand against the roof of her car, the way Franklin pressed his hand against his chest, just to feel something solid. Okay, Mama, she whispered. Okay. She got in the car. She drove home. The call came at 9:17 that night. It wasn't Reed, it wasn't Franklin. It was a number she didn't recognize, and she almost didn't answer it, and then something made her pick up the same instinct that had kept her calm in the shop when Reed had swept the shelves, the instinct that told her this was the kind of moment that required paying attention. Mrs. Whitmore, a man's voice, smooth in the way things are smooth when the smoothness is manufactured. Not local. I think you should know that you've been spending time with people who are going to bring you a considerable amount of trouble. She went very still. Who is this? Someone who has been watching the situation on Millhaven's east side with some interest, the voice said. Reed Calloway froze his development. That's created a gap. Other people have an interest in filling that gap. And a small bookshop with a stubborn owner sitting in the middle of that block is going to become, how should I put this, inconvenient for everyone involved. I don't know what you want from me, June said. I want you to understand that your association with the Calloways is not making you safer, the voice said. It's making you a piece on a board, and pieces on a board get moved whether they want to be or not. A pause. Sell the shop, Mrs. Whitmore. Take whatever number Calloway offers. Walk away before this becomes something your daughter has to grow up remembering. The line went dead. June set her phone down on the kitchen table. She sat in the silence of her kitchen, Willa asleep down the hall, the shop locked and dark 3 miles away, and she felt the particular cold that comes not from temperature, but from understanding that the world you're in is larger and more dangerous than you had accounted for. She picked the phone back up. She called Reed. He answered before the first ring had finished. June. Someone just called me, she said. Her voice was steady. A man. He said that your development freeze has created a gap that other people want to fill, and that my shop is sitting in the middle of it, and that I should sell before it becomes something my daughter has to remember. The silence on Reed's end was exactly 3 seconds long. She counted, and in those 3 seconds, she heard something she had not heard from Reed Calloway before, not calculation, not control, but the sound of a man who has just received information that has alarmed him. Genuinely alarmed him. Did he give a name? Reed said. No. Describe his voice. Smooth, not local, deliberately calm, the kind of calm that's meant to sound like a threat. Reed exhaled once sharp. Cross, he said. It wasn't a question. Who is Cross? A man who has been circling that east block for 18 months, Reed said. He's been waiting for me to move so he could see where I was going. When I froze the development, he would have read that as weakness, as an opening. Another pause, and she could feel him thinking hard and fast the way she imagined he thought best. June, I need you to listen to me carefully. Are you at home? Yes. Lock the doors. Don't open them tonight for anyone who isn't me or someone I send. I'm going to make some calls. Reed, I'm not asking you to trust me, he said, and his voice was tight with something urgent. I'm asking you to be safe while I handle something I caused. He paused. This happened because I froze the development, because of the choices I made this week. This is mine to fix. You didn't cause this, June said. Men like Cross cause this. Men like Cross move into spaces that men like me create, Reed said. There's a difference worth knowing. Lock your doors. I'll call you in an hour. He hung up. June sat in her kitchen. She looked at the wall above the table where a photograph of her mother hung, taken when Margaret was maybe 40, laughing at something off camera, her whole face open and delighted, the laugh of a woman who has not yet learned to be careful with her joy. You really did make things complicated, Mama, June said to the photograph. The photograph laughed its frozen laugh and said, nothing back. 40 minutes later, not an hour, 40 minutes, there was a knock at the door. June went to it without opening it and said, Who is it? Reed. She opened the door. He was not alone. Marcus was with him, standing slightly back, and there was another man she didn't recognize, but Reed stepped forward, and the other two stayed outside on the porch, and she registered in some quick and instinctive part of her that this was him being careful about the space he occupied in her home. Come in, she said. He came in. He did not sit down, which she had started to understand was what he did. When something was unresolved, he stood because standing meant he was still moving toward the answer. Cross Organization has had people in Millhaven for 6 months, he said. I knew that. What I didn't account for was what they'd read into the freeze. He looked at her directly. I'm putting protection on the shop and on this house tonight. Marcus and someone he trusts. They'll stay until I've had conversations that need to happen. You mean until you've dealt with Cross, June said. Yes. And how do you deal with someone like Cross? A pause. The way I know how to, he said. The words hung in the air between them, and what they meant was clear. Not spelled out, but clear, the way things are clear when you are standing in the kitchen of a woman who runs a bookshop, talking to a man who runs something else entirely, and you both understand exactly what the other one is. Reed. She said his name the way you say something when you need the person to hear what comes next is separate from everything else. I'm not asking you to do anything violent. I know. Whatever you do, it doesn't have a place in whatever you're trying to become. He looked at her. In his face, something complex moved through and settled. The calculation she had seen the first day in the shop, the weighing, the measuring was there, but it was different now. Not absent. Complicated. Like a man who is beginning to understand that the tools he built his life with are not the tools that are going to build the next part of it, but who has not yet assembled the new ones. You're telling me to be better than I know how to be, he said. I'm telling you there's a version of handling this that you don't go home from feeling the same, she said, just surrounded by more damage. She paused and she watched him recognize his own words coming back to him. I'm telling you to find that version. He stood still for a long moment. Whatever was happening inside him, he kept it contained, but the containment was visible now. The effort of it, the cost of it, in a way, it had not been 3 weeks ago in this city. Okay, fine, he said finally. Okay, she said. Willa appeared in the kitchen doorway, then rumpled and confused, dragging her blanket. She looked at Reed, then at June, then at Reed again. Why is the tall man in our kitchen? She asked. He came to check on us, June said. Willa looked at Reed with her gravity. Are we okay? Reed crouched down to her level for the second time in as many days. This time it came faster, more naturally, like a gesture that was becoming less foreign. "You're okay," he said. "I'm going to make sure of it." Willa nodded once apparently satisfied. Then she held out her blanket, a soft worn thing with faded stars on it, and offered it to Reed with the complete sincerity of a 5-year-old who has decided in her unilateral and final way that something is the right thing to do. "You can borrow this," she said, "if you're scared." Reed looked at the blanket for a moment. His jaw moved. He took it very carefully, the way you take something irreplaceable, and he held it in both hands, and his voice when he spoke was not quite steady. "Thank you, Willa," he said. "You're welcome," she said. "Don't lose it." She turned and went back down the hall to her room, dragging nothing now, as if she had given away what she could afford to, and found herself lighter for it. Reed stood up. He set the blanket gently on the kitchen table. He looked at it for a moment, and then he looked at June, and there was no performance in his face at all, no calculation, no strategy, no careful architecture of control. There was just a man who had walked into a bookshop to break something and somehow ended up in a kitchen holding a 5-year-old star blanket and trying to figure out how to be worth it. "I'll be back in the morning," he said. "Want to check on you." "You don't have to," June said. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm doing it." He left. June stood in her kitchen after the door closed and looked at the blanket on the table and thought about her mother, who had given the most irreversible thing imaginable to a stranger and asked for nothing back. She thought about Franklin Calloway pressing his hand against a borrowed heart every morning for 8 years. She thought about the voice on the phone, smooth manufactured, deliberate, and the cold it had left behind. She thought about Willa handing over her blanket with the uncomplicated certainty of someone who has not yet learned that kindness has to be rationed. She picked the blanket up. She folded it. She set it by the door so she wouldn't forget it in the morning. Then she went to check on her daughter, and she stood in the doorway of Willa's room for a long moment, listening to her breathe, and she let herself feel everything, the fear, the grief, the strange and terrible and not entirely unwelcome weight of being at the center of something much larger than she had understood. She reached into her pocket and found, without looking for it, the worn edge of a bookmark her mother had given her years ago. Just a strip of cardstock. Her mother's handwriting on it in the small, precise letters she used when she wanted something to last. It read, "The bravest thing you can do is stay open, even when staying open is the most frightening choice." June held it in her hand in the dark of her daughter's doorway and breathed. She stayed open. Reed was back at 7:15 the next morning, the way he said he would be, with 2 cups of coffee from Danny's place 2 doors down from the shop, and a look on his face that said he had not slept and was not going to pretend otherwise. June opened the door and looked at the coffee and then at him and said, "You talked to Danny. He said you take it with 1 sugar and enough cream that it stops being really coffee anymore," Reed said. His words. "He's not wrong," June said. She took the cup. She stepped back from the door, which was as close to an invitation as she was prepared to offer at 7 in the morning after the night she'd had. Reed came in. He looked at Willa's blanket, still folded by the door where June had left it. He did not comment on it, but she saw him register it, and the registering did something small and real to his face. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Some," she said. "You know." "Cross?" she asked, among other things. He sat down at the kitchen table, which surprised her. He was a man who stood when things were unresolved, and things were very much still unresolved, which meant sitting down was a choice, a deliberate one, the choice of a man trying to occupy less space. "I made calls last night. Cross has been building a position on the East Block for 6 months. Shell company's property options. Things my lawyers missed because they were looking at competitors in my lane, not at someone coming from a different direction entirely." He paused. "He's not just interested in the development. He's been watching me, waiting for something to use." "And freezing the development gave him something," June said. "It gave him a story, that I'm losing my grip, that the Calloway operation is compromised." Reed's jaw tightened. "In my world, that kind of story spreads fast and it costs more than money." June sat down across from him. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "What does he want?" "The block, all of it, including your shop." Reed looked at her steadily. "He's been the one pushing the pressure, June. Not just me. For the past 3 months, the secondary approaches, the anonymous letters, the building code complaints, someone filed the small things that kept going wrong. That was cross. Running interference from behind me. June went still. He was escalating it, making me feel more cornered than I was. Yes, so that if you eventually sold, you'd sell to whoever was offering, and he'd step in as the buyer before I knew what happened. Reed's voice was flat and precise, the voice of a man who has spent the night being very angry and has converted the anger into information. He used my operation as cover for his own. The thing that moved through June then was not fear exactly. It was the particular cold clarity of understanding that the situation she was in was more layered than she'd known, that she hadn't been standing between one man and a block of real estate. She'd been standing in the middle of something with sides she hadn't seen. "So what do you do?" she said. "I've already started," Reed said. "My lawyers filed injunctions on 3 of his property options this morning. He has 60 days to dissolve or defend them, and he doesn't have clean paperwork. I made sure my team found that last night." He paused. "He's going to know by mid-morning that I moved, and when he knows, he's going to push back." "At me, June said. "He might try," Reed said. "That's why Marcus is outside." June looked out the kitchen window for a moment. Then she looked back at Reed. "I want you to hear something," she said, "and I need you to actually hear it, not just wait for me to finish, so you can reassure me." He was quiet, listening. "I'm not going to live like this," she said. "I'm not going to live with men stationed outside my house and my daughter watching strangers sit in cars on our street. I don't care what the reason is or how good the intentions behind it are. That's not the life I built here, and it's not the life Willa is going to grow up in." "I understand," Reed said. "Do you buy?" "Yes. No hedging in it, which means I need to resolve this faster than I planned." "How fast?" "Days," he said, "not weeks." She looked at him. "And if he escalates before you can—" Reed looked right back at her. "Then I deal with it. Without doing anything you'd be ashamed of," he said. "I heard you last night. I'm still hearing you." The thing was, she believed him. That was the part that was keeping her off balance, had been keeping her off balance since the hospital corridor, since the kitchen the night before, since he had taken Willa's star blanket in both hands like something irreplaceable. She had spent her whole life being her mother's daughter, which meant being someone who chose very carefully and deliberately to believe the best of people until they proved her wrong. She had believed in Reed Calloway's capacity to be different before she had any real evidence of it, and the evidence was now beginning to arrive, and she didn't quite know what to do with the fact that it was genuine. She didn't trust it. She trusted him less than she would trust someone who had not walked into her shop with destruction in his hands 3 weeks ago. But she believed it, and there was a difference. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "Keep the shop open. Keep your routine. Don't let him make you small." He paused. "That's actually the most important thing. If Cross thinks you're rattled, he'll use it. If he sees that you're standing exactly where you've always stood, it complicates his play." "Standing where I've always stood," June said. "That I can do." Something that was almost a smile moved across his face. "I know," he said. "I've seen it." She opened the shop at 9. Marcus was outside, unobtrusive, keeping his distance in a way that said he'd been instructed to be invisible. Danny brought a second round of coffees at 10 and told June she looked tired, and she told him she was fine, and he didn't believe her, and he didn't push, which was why she liked Danny. Patrice arrived at 10:30, took one look at the shop, one look at June, one look out the window at Marcus on the sidewalk, and said, "Tell me everything." And this time I mean actually everything. June told her. She told her about the phone call about Cross, about Reed coming to the house at 7 in the morning. She told her about Franklin and the letter, and Willa pressing her ear against an old man's chest to hear her grandmother's heart. She told her about Willa handing Reed the star blanket, and Reed holding it like it was the most delicate thing he'd ever been trusted with. When she finished, Patrice was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "June, that man is in love with you." June blinked. That's not what this is." "I'm 73 years old," Patrice said. "I have watched a great many men in a great many situations, and I am telling you that the man you're describing, the one who showed up at 7 in the morning with your specific coffee order, The one who took your daughter's blanket with both hands. The one who is standing down an organized crime operation because you told him to do it without doing anything. You'd be ashamed of that man as not just trying to repay a debt. Patrice. I'm not saying it's simple, Patrice said. I'm not saying it's easy or wise or that you should do anything about it. I'm saying name it correctly. Because if you don't name it, you can't make clear decisions about it. June stood behind her register and felt the full and complicated weight of what Patrice was saying. She didn't answer it. She picked up a pile of returns and began restocking them because the physical act of putting things in their right places was the only thing that helped when the inside of her head became too loud. She was halfway through the returns when the door opened and a man she had never seen before walked in. He was perhaps 60, slight well-dressed, in a way that was understated by design, the kind of clothes that said money without advertising it. His hair was silver and his hands were soft, and he looked around the shop with the particular look of a man who has come to a place specifically and is performing the act of arriving casually. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, not a question. June's hand stopped moving on the book she was holding. I don't believe we've met, she said. No, he said pleasantly. We haven't. My name is Gerald Cross. The shop went very quiet. Patrice looked up from her chair. Cross smiled a smooth, practiced, entirely cold smile. I hope I'm not interrupting. I'm a great admirer of independent bookshops. They're a dying breed, aren't they? Such a shame when they disappear. Can I help you find something? June said. Her voice was perfectly level. She did not look toward the window toward Marcus. She did not reach for her phone. Pause. She stood behind her register, the way she always stood, the way she'd stood in front of Reed 3 weeks ago, the way her mother had stood in front of the landlord 30 years ago. Upright, still, unafraid to be seen. I think we can help each other, Cross said. He moved to the counter with that same pleasant deliberateness. Up close, she could see that his eyes were not warm at all. They were the eyes of a man who had spent a very long time being underestimated because his face suggested approachability. I have an interest in this block that predates Mr. Calloway's by quite some time, and I'm prepared to make you an offer that I think you'll find significantly more appealing than anything the Calloway family has presented. I'm not interested in offers, June said. You haven't heard this one. I don't need to. Cross tilted his head slightly. Mrs. Whitmore, I want to be honest with you because I think you're a woman who appreciates honesty. Reed Calloway is not your ally. Whatever he has told you in the past week, whatever gestures he has made, they are transactional. They are the behavior of a man who has realized that breaking the thing didn't work and is now trying charm. He paused. I'm not here to charm you. I'm here to make you a legitimate business offer and let you make a clear decision with full information. And the full information, June said carefully, would include the fact that you've been running pressure on this shop from behind Reed Calloway's operation for 3 months. Anonymous complaints letters. The small things that kept going wrong. She watched his face. The pleasant expression did not change, but something behind the eyes shifted, recalibrated. Yes, she said, I know. Cross was quiet for a moment. Then the smile returned, and it was, if anything, slightly more genuine, say now, the smile of a man who has encountered something unexpectedly interesting. He told you, Cross said. This morning, June said. Over coffee. He's more forthcoming than I expected. Cross straightened slightly. All right, direct then. You're sitting on a piece of land that is going to be developed. By me, by Calloway, or by someone after both of us, but it will be developed. The only variable is what you walk away with and under whose terms. He looked at her steadily. My terms are better. Your terms, June said, involve a phone call to my house threatening my daughter's memory of her childhood. So no, your terms are not better. The pleasantness in Cross's face went away. What replaced it was not rage, he was too controlled for rage, but something colder. The face of a man who does not like being declined and is deciding what that means for his next move. I'd think carefully, he said quietly. Think carefully every day, June said. It's how I've kept this shop open for 11 years with no help from anyone like you or anyone like Rita Wuto Calloway. Think carefully is my default setting. Cross looked at her for a long moment. You're braver than you should be, he said, or you're less frightening than you think, she replied. He left. He did not slam the door. He walked out with the same pleasant deliberateness he had walked in with, and the bell above the door rang, and Patrice exhaled from her chair so loudly it was almost a word. June pulled out her phone and called Reed. He picked up in one ring. What happened? Not a question. He had been watching, or Marcus had been watching, and he already knew someone had gone in. Cross was just here, June said. In person. He made an offer. I declined. He left. The silence on Reed's end lasted 2 seconds. Are you all right? I'm fine. June. I said I'm fine, Reed. She paused. But I need you to understand that whatever you're doing with the injunctions, you need to move faster. He came here himself. That's not a man who's being cautious anymore. That's a man who's decided to apply direct pressure. I know, Reed said, and his voice was tight in a way she hadn't heard before, a particular tightness that told her the control was costing him something right now. I need you to close the shop for the afternoon. Absolutely not. June. No. Her voice was firm and final. I will not close this shop because Gerald Cross walked in and tried to scare me. That is exactly what he wants. If I close, he wins the day, and I do not give that man the day. She paused. Handle your end. I'll handle mine. A very long pause. You're the most difficult person I've ever tried to help. Then you've been helping the wrong people, she said. Call me when you have something real to tell me. She hung up. She put her phone in her pocket. She looked at Patrice. Patrice was already back in her book. Handled, she said without looking up. The afternoon moved, no more visitors. Marcus remained outside, and at some point he was joined by someone else. A woman June hadn't seen before, positioned on the other side of the door, and the professionalism with which these two completely ignored each other while covering every angle of the entrance was, June admitted to herself, somewhat reassuring. At 3 o'clock, Willa arrived from her half-day program delivered by Dara, who looked at Marcus outside and the woman by the door, and then looked at June with eyes that said they were going to have a very long phone call later. Willa ran in, dropped her bag, and ran directly to her reading corner, which was her version of exhaling after a day. June watched her go and felt the specific love that comes from watching someone you made be completely and authentically themselves, and she held on to it, that feeling, because it was the truest thing in the shop right now. At 4:47, Reed walked in. He had his phone in one hand and an expression on his face that she had not seen before. Not the control, not the tightness, not the careful reconstruction she'd been watching for 2 weeks. Something different. Something that looked like relief, which on Reed Calloway's face was a foreign and disorienting sight. It's done, he said. June looked at him. Crossword. His property options are dissolved. 2 of his shell companies have been reported to the state AG by my attorneys. There were financial irregularities that my team documented last night. He's got enough trouble that Millhaven becomes the last thing he wants attached to his name. Reed paused. He'll pull back, not because he's kind, because the math changed. June exhaled. It was a long, slow, full exhale, the kind you can only produce when something you've been holding very tightly is allowed finally to be set down. And the development, she said, your block. Still frozen. He looked at her. I've been thinking about something different, a different approach to what that block becomes. He paused. I'd like to talk to you about it. Not today when you're ready. I have an idea that involves the shop staying exactly where it is. She looked at him for a long moment. That's a significant change of direction. Yes, he said. What changed? He held her gaze. I did, he said simply. From the reading corner came Willa's voice. Mr. Reed, she said it with the casual certainty of someone who has decided what to call a person and is not interested in feedback. Did you bring my blanket back? Reed reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced the folded star blanket. He had brought it with him. He had not forgotten. He walked to the reading corner and crouched down and held it out to Willa, who took it with both hands and immediately tucked it under one arm, satisfied. You kept it safe, she said. I did. Good, she said. You can borrow it again if you need to. Reed stayed crouched at her level for a moment. Something moved across his face, something that was not guilt and not calculation and not the careful management of vulnerability. Just a man in the reading corner of a bookshop being looked at by a 5-year-old who had decided he was worth keeping track of. Thank you, Willa, he said, and you're welcome. She opened her book. I'm reading now. Okay, he said. He stood up. He walked back to where June was. He stood across the counter from her, that careful distance he maintained, and he looked at her with the particular look of a man who has a great deal more to say and has decided this is not yet the moment for all of it. How's your father? June asked. He had a good day, Reed said. He called me this afternoon. He wanted to know how things were with you. He paused. He said to tell you that if Willa ever wants to come back, he'll teach her to play cards. He said your mother apparently loved cards. He found that out from the hospital liaison. June laughed. It came out real and full and surprised. She was a terrible cheat, she said. She cheated at every card game she ever played, and she was completely shameless about it. Reed smiled. It was not a small, controlled, strategic expression. It was a real smile, unguarded, slightly startled by itself, the smile of a man rediscovering that his face could do this. I'll tell him, he said. He left at 5 after helping June, without being asked, move 3 heavy boxes of new arrivals from the back room to the front. He did it efficiently and without ceremony, the way people help when they're not performing the helping, when it's just a thing that needs doing and they have hands. After he left, June stood in her shop in the late afternoon quiet. Willa was still in the reading corner. The new arrivals sat on the counter waiting to be processed. The evening light was doing something soft to the old wood of the shelves. She thought about what Patrice had said. She thought about what her mother had said about staying open. She thought about the distance between where Reed had been 3 weeks ago and where he was right now, and whether distance traveled in a short time was the same as distance that had roots. She didn't have an answer. She wasn't sure she needed one yet. What she knew was this: her mother's heart was beating 3 miles away in an old man's chest, and the old man was planning to teach her daughter to play cards. And the old man's son had this afternoon taken down a threat she hadn't even fully seen coming and had returned her daughter's star blanket, folded and safe in his inside jacket pocket next to whatever was left of the person he used to be. She reached up and straightened a book on the shelf beside her. Okay, Mama, she said quietly. I think I see what you were doing. She wasn't sure she was ready for it. But she was her mother's daughter, which meant being ready had never been the point. The point was staying open. She turned off the display lights at front, left the back ones on for Willa, and started working through the new arrivals, and the shop breathed the way it always breathed, and the evening came in around the edges of everything, and Millhaven went on being the city. It was complicated, layered, full of people, each carrying something the others couldn't see. And in a bookshop on its east side, a woman who had refused to be moved was beginning, slowly and on her own terms, to decide where she was willing to go. 3 weeks after Gerald Cross walked out of Whitmore Books and out of Millhaven entirely, Reed Calloway asked June if she would take a walk with him. Not to a meeting, not to his office, not to the hospital, not to anywhere with an agenda attached. Just a walk. He texted it to her on a Tuesday morning. 6 words, would you take a walk with me? And then he waited, and he did not send a follow-up, and he did not have Marcus call, and he did not appear at the shop with coffee as leverage. He waited, which was new on him, and they both knew it. June stared at the text for a long moment. Then she typed back, Saturday, afternoon. Willa comes, he replied immediately. Of course, she told Dara about it that night, and Dara said June in the tone she reserved for moments when she had been saying something for weeks and was watching it finally arrive. June said, don't, and Dara said, I'm just saying, and June said, I know what you're saying. And Dara said, and June said, and I don't know yet, which was the most honest thing she had said out loud about it. The thing was, she had been watching him, not waiting for him to fail. She was not that kind of woman, had not been raised to be that kind of woman. And her mother's voice in her head had strong opinions about people who watched others with folded arms and narrowed eyes, waiting to be proven right about the worst. She had been watching the way you watch something growing, not constantly, not anxiously, but with the peripheral attention of someone who notices change without having to stare at it. And he was changing, not performing change, not producing the visible gestures of a man who wants to be seen changing, but actually moving in the way that real movement happens, slowly, imperfectly, with setbacks and silences, and moments where the old version of him surfaced in his voice or his posture, and then something caught it and pulled it back. He had come to the shop 4 times in 3 weeks, each time with a reason that wasn't really the reason. A question about the community foundation paperwork, a message from Franklin, a book Willa had apparently asked him to find, which stunned June because she had not been aware that Willa had been requesting books from Reed Calloway, and when she asked Willa about it, Willa said with complete serenity, "He said he likes books now. I'm helping him." "You're helping him," June repeated. "He didn't know where to start," Willa said. "So I made him a list." June stood in the kitchen and absorbed the information that her 5-year-old daughter had appointed herself Reed Calloway's literary guide, and she did not know whether to laugh or cry and ended up doing something in between that Willa politely ignored. Saturday came. Reed arrived at 12:15, which told her he had been somewhere nearby at noon waiting and had forced himself to be 3 minutes late so as not to seem like he had been waiting. She noticed this and chose not to mention it. Willa ran to him when he came through the door. She held up the book. She was currently in the middle of a chapter book, this time a significant developmental leap that she was very proud of, and said, "I'm on chapter 7. There's a dog in it." "Is the dog okay?" Reed asked. "So far," Willa said gravely. "But I'm worried." "I'll keep my fingers crossed," he said. Willa accepted this and ran to get her shoes. They walked through the neighborhood around the shop, the three of them, and it was simultaneously entirely ordinary, and the strangest thing June had done in years. Willa walked between them for a while and then ahead of them, the way children do when they've decided the adults are moving too slowly and the world requires investigation. Reed and June walked side by side with a foot of space between them and talked about everything except what they were both thinking about. He told her about his father's latest numbers, which had improved enough that Dr. Voss had used the word remarkable in a context that was not alarming. She told him about the Community Foundation paperwork, which she had finally decided to accept, not without a long conversation with Adara and with Patrice, and most honestly with herself in the dark at 2 a.m, working through the difference between accepting something and owing something, and arriving at the conclusion her mother would have wanted her to arrive at, that grace received and grace given are not the same transaction, and that refusing grace does not make you noble, it makes you alone. "I sent the paperwork back yesterday," she told him. "Signed." He looked at her. "My father called me when he got it. He didn't say much. He just called and said her name, your mother's name, and then he said thank you." Reed paused. "I think it's the first time in 8 years he said her name out loud." June absorbed that quietly. "Margaret," she said. "Yes." She would have hated a fuss, June said. She would have been embarrassed by the gratitude and then pretended she wasn't and then made everyone tea. Reed almost smiled. "My father would have liked her." "Most people did," June said. "She had the kind of she made you feel like you were exactly the right person for the room you were both in. Like you'd been specifically chosen." She paused. "I've been trying to figure out how to do that my whole life. I think it's not a skill you can learn." "I think it was just her." They walked in silence for a moment. Ahead of them, Willa had stopped to examine something on the sidewalk with the forensic intensity of a scientist. "I've been thinking about the block," Reed said. June glanced at him. "The development. What it could be," he said, "instead of what I originally planned." He stopped walking. She stopped too. "I want to build something around the shop. Not over it, not instead of it, around it. Mixed-use residential above small commercial at street level, the kind of thing that brings people in rather than pushing them out." He looked at her. "There's a design firm I've worked with before. I'd like you to be in those conversations. Not as a courtesy, as someone whose opinion shapes what gets built." June looked at him for a long moment. "You want my input on your development. I want your input on what your neighborhood becomes," he said. "That's different." "It's very different," she said. "And 6 weeks ago, you would not have understood that difference." "6 weeks ago, I didn't understand a lot of things," Reed said simply. Ahead of them, Willa straightened up and turned around and cupped her hands around her mouth. "Mama, there's a ladybug." "Don't pick it up," June called back. "I'm just looking at it." June turned back to Reed. He was watching Willa with that expression, the one she had stopped trying to find a single word for because it was too many things at once, and all of them were true. Gratitude and grief, and something that had been growing steadily since the hospital corridor and had not stopped. Patrice was right. She had known Patrice was right for 2 weeks. She had been sitting with the knowing and letting it be what it was at her own pace on her own terms, the way her mother had taught her to sit with the things that mattered carefully without rushing, because rushing the important things was how you arrived at them only halfway. "Reed," she said. He looked at her. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly, not strategically, not in the way that's designed to produce the response you want from me. Honestly. Okay, he said. What is it you actually want, she said. Not from the block, not from the development, from this. She gestured briefly between them. From whatever this is. He was quiet for a moment. Not the controlled quiet, not the strategic pause. The quiet of a man who is looking directly at something that he has been carefully not looking at it directly, and is now deciding he's done being careful. I want to know you, he said, properly, over time, with no agenda and no transaction attached to it. He held her gaze. I want to earn the right to be someone you're glad to know, and I understand that I'm starting from a significant deficit on that. He paused. And I want Willa to grow up knowing that the world contains men who behave differently than I have. I want to be evidence of that, for her. The words landed quietly and with full weight, and June felt them the way you feel the things that are too true to be argued with. That's a lot to want, she said. I know. And you understand that wanting it doesn't mean you get it. Yes. And that there are things you've done that are going to require a long time and a great deal of consistency before I can put them down completely. I know that too, he said. I'm not asking you to put them down. I'm asking you to let me stand next to them with you while you decide what to do with them. June looked at him for a long moment. Willa was making her way back toward them, now finished with the ladybug, moving on to the next thing the way she always moved forward, curious, undeterred. Okay, June said. Reed blinked. Okay. Don't make it complicated, she said. Okay. Something moved across his face that she had not seen there before in any form, not relief exactly, not triumph, nothing with an edge on it, just something open, like a window that has been closed for a very long time and has just been allowed for the first time to let the air in. Willa arrived between them and took one of each of their hands without preamble or permission, the way she took most things she decided belonged to her, and she said, Can we get lunch? I'm very hungry and I've been patient for a long time. June looked down at her. You've been patient for 40 minutes. That's a long time when you're hungry, Willa said. Reed looked at June looked at Reed. And this time, when the almost smile crossed his face, she did not look away from it, and he did not pull it back. Let's get lunch, June said. They ate at a small Italian place, 3 blocks from the shop. Red check tablecloth bread that came without being asked for the kind of place that had been there for 30 years and would be there for 30 more. Willa ordered pasta and ate half of it and then fell asleep sitting up in her chair in the specific and total way that small children collapse when they've hit their limit, leaning against Reed's arm, without asking, just choosing him as the nearest available surface and going there. Reed went completely still when it happened. He looked at June with an expression that said, What do we do? Don't move, June said quietly. She'll wake up angry. He sat without moving for 20 minutes. He did not reach for his phone. He did not check anything. He sat with a sleeping 5-year-old leaning against his arm, and he was for those 20 minutes entirely and specifically present, which was not a thing June had seen from many adults, let alone men who ran empires. She watched him do it, and she thought about her mother, who had believed in the transformative capacity of love with a sincerity that June had always found both beautiful and slightly naive. She thought about what it meant to believe in a person, not because they had proven themselves fully, but because the evidence was real and growing, and the person themselves was looking at their own reflection with something that was not vanity, but genuine and costly reckoning. She thought about the books on the floor. She thought about Willa behind the curtain. She thought about Franklin pressing his hand against a borrowed heart for 8 years, saying a name he didn't know. She thought about her mother, who had given the most irreversible gift in the world to a stranger and called it nothing, who had said, give it clean. The moment you start tracking what you gave and who has it, it stops being a gift. She understood now fully and finally what her mother had meant, not just about organ donation, about everything, about the whole practice of loving something or someone in a world that would give you 100 reasons not to. You gave clean, or you didn't give at all. You stayed open, or you spent your whole life managing the distance between yourself and the things that could hurt you, which was just a slower way of being alone. She had not inherited her mother's fearlessness. She did not think she ever fully would. But she had inherited her mother's stubbornness, which was close enough. She reached across the table and straightened the salt shaker, which was leaning, and she felt Reed look at her, and she looked back. "She's out," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "She weighs more than she looks like she weighs." "She always has," June said. "She came into the world like she was already sure she belonged here." "She did," Reed said. He looked at Willa for a moment, at the small face gone loose and peaceful with sleep. "She's the most certain person I've ever met." "She gets that from her grandmother," June said. Reed looked at her, then steady, direct, no management in it. "I'd like to meet her," he said. "I know I can't. I know that. But I'd like you to know that I think about what she was like. Based on everything." He stopped. "Based on her shop, her books, the way she raised you, the fact that she gave what she gave, the way she gave it." He paused. "She must have been extraordinary." "She was ordinary," June said. "She was just ordinary in an extraordinary way. She made dinner and she kept the books and she argued with the landlord and she cheated at cards and she loved the people she loved without keeping score." She paused. "I think that's what extraordinary actually looks like up close. It doesn't look like anything special. It just looks like a person who decided to keep showing up." Reed was quiet for a moment. "That's what I'm trying to do," he said. "I know I don't have the right to say that yet." "You can say it," June said. "Whether you have the right to it is something only time knows." He nodded, accepted that, did not push past it. At 2:30, Franklin Calloway called. Reed looked at the screen and then at June, and she said, "Answer it," and he did. She could hear Franklin's voice from across the table, not the words, just the tone, and the tone was warm and alert and had something particular in it, something she could not identify until Reed's face changed. Reed said, "When?" and then said, "How sure is he?" and then said, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He lowered the phone, because he looked at June. His face was not afraid. He was not a man whose face did fear easily, but it was doing something careful and real. "What is it?" she said. "Voss wants to do a procedure," Reed said. "A small one, a precaution. My father's number shifted this morning, and he wants to run something before the weekend." He paused. "It's probably nothing." "Voss says probably nothing." "But—" "Go," June said. "I don't want to read." Her voice was quiet and certain. "Go. He's your father." He looked at Willa, still asleep against his arm. "I don't want to wake her." "I'll get her," June said. She stood and came around the table and lifted Willa with the practiced ease of 5 years of doing exactly this, and Willa stirred and muttered something incoherent and then settled against June's shoulder without fully surfacing. June nodded at Reed. "Go." He stood. He looked at June holding Willa, and whatever crossed his face in that moment was something she thought he probably wasn't aware of, the full and unguarded look of a man understanding perhaps for the first time what it would mean to have something this real to lose, and how different that was from the things he had built his life protecting. "Thank you," he said. "It came out rough." "Call me when you know something," she said. He left. June stood in the restaurant with Willow on her shoulder and watched him go, and she felt the thing she had been sitting with for 3 weeks settle into something more definitive inside her, the way a picture comes into focus, not all at once, but the adjustments getting smaller until what you're looking at is simply clear. The call came at 5:48. "It was minor," Reed said the moment she picked up. "Voss is satisfied. He's resting." A pause, and in the pause she heard the exhale of a man who had been holding his breath for 3 hours. "He's okay." "I'm glad," she said. She meant it completely. "He asked about Willa," Reed said. "He wanted to know if she'd come back. He said he's been practicing his card game." "She'll come back," June said. "We'll come next week if he's up for it." Silence for a moment. Then Reed said very quietly, "June." "I know," she said. "I haven't said it." "You don't have to say it yet," she said. "We have time." Another silence, longer. The kind of silence that is not empty but full, that contains things that will take months or years to say properly, and knows this about itself. "Okay," he said. "'Kay," she said. She hung up. She sat on the couch with Willa, who had reawakened from her restaurant nap with full energy and strong opinions about what to watch on television, and she let the evenings settle around them, the way evenings do, when nothing is being managed or performed, just lived. At 8, she tucked Willa in. Willa held her star blanket in both arms and looked up at June with her direct, serious, unedited face. "Mama," she said, "is Mr. Reed going to be around for a long time?" June looked at her daughter, at the face that had her mother's eyes and her own stubbornness, and something entirely its own that was still becoming what it was going to be. The face of someone who had sat behind a curtain in a bookshop trying not to cry too loud, and had afterward handed her blanket to the person who had frightened her because she had decided he needed it. "I think so," June said. Willa nodded. "Good," she said. "He needs more books." June laughed. She kissed Willa's forehead. She turned off the light. She stood in the dark of her daughter's doorway for a moment, and she thought about all of it, the whole long chain of it, the choices that had led to choices that had led to this exact evening in this exact life. Her grandmother's shop, her mother's hands on those shelves, the form signed in a hospital room 8 years ago, Franklin Calloway pressing his palm to a scar every morning, being grateful to a name he didn't know. Reed storming in with his destruction and walking back out changed by the one person in the world who had refused to be unmade by him. Her mother had not planned any of it. She had simply given what she had cleanly and without conditions, and the gift had found its way through 8 years of grief and secrets, in anger and power to arrive finally here in a bookshop, still standing in a child who trusted freely in a man trying hard and imperfectly to be someone worth trusting. Margaret Whitmore had given a stranger her heart, and her heart, it turned out, had known exactly where it was going. June reached into her pocket out and found the bookmark, as she always did, her mother's handwriting, worn smooth now at the edges. "The bravest thing you can do is stay open." She held it for a moment in the dark. Then she put it back in her pocket where it belonged, and she went to make herself tea, and the shop 3 miles away stood on its corner the way it had always stood, full of books and breath, in the particular stubborn life of a place that had been loved too long and too honestly to be taken from the world. Some things in the end are simply stronger than the forces sent to break them. That was what Margaret had understood. That was what she had built her daughter to know. And standing in a kitchen in Millhaven on a Saturday night with her daughter asleep down the hall, and a man across the city pressing his hand against his father's door and being grateful June Whitmore finally fully knew it too.